But for right now, I'm joined by Paul and Cale, and we're going to just try to make some sense of what's been happening over at the Capitol. So, hey guys.
Hey.
Hey, Jen.
How's it going?
So what have you guys been seeing? I mean, I tuned in a little late, but obviously there is a lot going on in DC right now. It looks like some Trump supporters, maybe anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000, have stormed the Capitol. I think it's still unclear at this point how exactly they got past security, how they got in, to what extent, or to what is actually happening inside right now. But this is unfolding.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very tumultuous moment. It's hard to really say much right now, of course, because it's ongoing. Obviously, it's shocking, and we hope that people, especially in the DC area, are safe and well right now. In some ways, this is, obviously I just said it's shocking, and in some ways it's not shocking, because this has been something that's been premeditated in a certain sense, that there has been a faction of both elected Republicans and, of course, people in Republican or conservative media that have been kind of stoking this on. And, it's something where, again, even without that, it's somewhat not surprising that just kind of the tenor of the Trump campaign, both Trump campaigns, it's very visceral response to what is really basically kind of the just full collapse of society over the last few decades, both economically but socially and politically. That and then kind of infused with far right nationalism, infused with really hateful bigotry and white supremacy, and all of these really horrible reactionary ideologies. But again, that only makes sense because these people, I want to be clear though, I mean, I don't want to characterize who the people that are involved in this are right now, but where you get any kind of popular support for this, it comes out of very desperate people who are in, shitty economic situations. My guess would be that, if this is anything like similar Trump, pro-Trump protests in the last year or so, and honestly throughout most of this term, it's probably going to be more middle class. It's probably going to be like small business owners, which are like the bedrock of Trump's support. And again, like the kind of people that have the time and the resources to actually do something like this. But I think we can simultaneously say, like, there is the undeniable massive collapse of society, and there is this really horrific ideology that people unfortunately respond to because
right.
And I think it's incumbent on the left to have to make arguments, maybe not that's going to appeal to some small business owner necessarily that's involved in this, but to people that find some of this appealing, that actually a better world is possible. But
right.
And and we should say, like Jen said, there's so much information still coming out. We don't want to give all hot takes right now, but and this is very cliche. I almost don't want to say it, but it really, it's just yet another symptom of this very deep rot in this country. Like Cale said, and it's the 40 years of neoliberalism just accelerated, and it's like that classic Ground Street quote about morbid symptoms, and we're just living through them. And I think people are very just unmoored politically, economically, socially, culturally. And, I don't know, the old rules of politics just don't seem to apply anymore. And we can't keep proceeding in this way without more stuff like this happening. And even Biden's, I don't know if any of you saw Biden's speech today, even something about that just felt kind of out of touch and not in step or up to what we need to do. And I think part of what's been hard with me thinking about this, I do think that there were times that some of this talk in the last 2 months of a coup has felt a little overblown and maybe, sometimes not very grounded. And, we don't know what's going to happen. Like maybe tomorrow the votes are going to be certified and this is going to just seem like a weird, crazy blip. And I think what's unhelpful about how the mainstream media has talked of the coup is like, I think they could talk about it more seriously is like how much of this is kind of like almost a warm-up act or a test run for if things keep declining and there is no response from the left of at least like a social democratic answer to our problem, like, it's just a preview of what we're going to see from the right, and which has been like what the right has done in Latin America for decades. Who's to say that these kinds of things won't come out if a leftist like Bernie were to be elected in the future? That's kind of what worries me, but it's very hard to put your finger on how that might play out in the future. I don't know if it was like this insane level of incompetence, but I do feel like that the police were tacitly supportive of this in a way. Maybe if they didn't think it would escalate to what it did. And what I always tell people is that, in Greece, in the fascist party Golden Dawn, 30% of police members were members of Golden Dawn. And I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened here. And we do have a clip of protesters like taking selfies with the police. And again, I don't know. We don't know the whole story, but it is a little, it shakes you a little bit to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think for me, that is kind of the most disturbing element of what's going on right now, like the level of cooperation that we're seeing with politicians like Trump and Hawley, who, have sort of issued their sort of requisite, like, we don't support this, please stay peaceful, but obviously provoked this entire thing with their rhetoric over the past basically since the election, right? And then Hawley's recent declaration that he was going to object to the Electoral College count. And, I think so when it comes to actually, just the protesters or the protests themselves, like, something I've been thinking about is when George W. Bush was reelected in 2004, I was in Portland, Oregon, and there was a big demonstration against Bush, even though that time he had been elected like fair and square. Like he won not just the Electoral College, but also the popular vote, which of course was not the case in 2000. But in 2004, he did win. And, there was a big demonstration in Portland where everybody who hated Bush kind of rolled out. And in a way, like we didn't storm the Capitol, but like it's the Pacific Northwest. So like I think some Starbucks were smashed, and there were scuffles between protesters and the police, and like lots of calls for like overthrowing the government. And at the time, I remember being like I was there protesting, but I remember being like, well, is this somehow like subverting or like challenging democracy? Because I mean, he did win fair and square, like I said. And this older activist was like, no, protesting is democracy also. And I think that that's true. And, I thought about that right after the election when Trump supporters were protesting the election results, and I think like liberal commentators were getting angry at them and saying they were subverting democracy. Like I'm not trying to equate the two, because I think that there are differences, namely that the Trump protesters are usually armed. But I think, again, what makes this so different is that unlike, the ragtag Bush protesters, these protesters seem to have at least the tacit endorsement of quite a few people in power, and as you were saying, perhaps also the police and like some aspects of Capitol security.
Right. Yeah, and like even the last 10 years, even globally, like we are in an incredibly volatile political age. I don't know what you want to call it, but you have new parties, new left and right wing parties emerging all over the world, and I think. Who knows what Trump wanted to happen today, but there's a level where some things get beyond elite control. And I think, and he's been playing this very dangerous game, and you can see a result of it today. And I think it just speaks to like the volatility of our age that, I mean, as much as we know the ruling class knows how to run shit and they get what they want, so many things right now feel open-ended, which could be a great opportunity for left. It could be just like the beginning of the end of what was the left. But Yeah, a lot of things are just getting beyond elite control. And I think I said to some people in 2016, like, I'm just giving up trying to predict what's going to happen in politics. And now I feel, more validated in that. So that's all I'll say there.
Yeah, I think the point that you made earlier about how like basically institutions have crumbled. And I think we hear a lot from, the liberal commentariat that, oh, like there's so much animosity and like political polarization right now. And that's true to an extent. But I think it is largely the result of all of these, not just working class, but social institutions in general being hollowed out by capitalism. So people are extremely atomized now. I don't think that there's a sense that, your vote really counts, right? And we have, on top of that, all of this social science research that says basically that elites do control politics. Like Benjamin Page and Martin Giles. I think, they're two researchers who basically found that the top 10% of the economic distribution wields disproportionate influence on politics. And, everybody else's vote basically amounts to nothing. That might be a too simplistic way of looking at it, but I think
the bottom 40 to 50% basically have no political power
Right.
or representation
Right.
in this country.
Right. And, on this show and on other shows on the Jacobin channel, we've made the point that the working class is not represented in Congress. Like we hear a lot about representation in Congress when it comes to, racial and gender diversity, but workers aren't represented. Again, what's happening now at the Capitol is extremely horrifying. And I should say, is not populist, okay? Like I know that the mainstream media has kind of portrayed populism over the last 4 years as like, an incendiary mob with pitchforks. But what's happening now is profoundly anti-democratic. And that's actually something that Crystal gets into a little later in our interview, so.
Well, it's also where, there was this really great book that came out a while back by Peter Mayer called Ruling the Void. And the phenomenon that he was describing that people like our friend and comrade Anton Jaeger has continued that research in Jacobin and elsewhere is that basically, I mean, this hollowing out, what it ends up doing is that like the actual politicians and what they're doing becomes so separated from what actual people are going through, what they're dealing with, what they're interested in. The parties come to no longer represent particular political orientations. They're just kind of these blob catch-all things. And I mean, there's no greater representation of politicians ruling a void than seeing the protesters storm into Congress today. Like that, it's a hall of Congress with no one in it except for protesters who are, again, ideologically, politically, basically completely different than the three of us, but it does speak to like people, and deeply frustrated people they have no connection to what politics is in this country right now. And so we're going to keep seeing these like sporadic and oftentimes violent, oftentimes again deeply hateful expressions, oftentimes from the right. And, we also see protests like we saw over the summer with Black Lives Matter, which, of course, by and large was not violent, So, I mean, but the thing is that, and I'm pulling a phrase from actually Bayard Rustin of going from protest to politics. And this is something actually that the late and great Leo Panitch, who passed away recently, was really stressing at the end of his life, along with some co-authors, that ultimately, like, what the left has to focus on right now is going from protest actions and protest movements into political formations, into institutions. And so it's both, I think, I think when he was saying it, it was meant as a strategic, like, this is what we have to do in order to continue attempting to take power for working people in this country and elsewhere. But I think in a kind of an unfortunate flip side, the right is also learning how to go from protest to politics, or at least there's the chance that they could, right? And so I think, what we should keep in mind, when we look at what's going on today, and what's something, I think it's an open question that I think needs to be assessed by the left and by others, is to what extent is the right organized? To what extent is this today sporadic? I think, my sense is that it wasn't a fairly organized thing, but I'm probably, I could be totally wrong on that. Again, I probably shouldn't be saying something like that on the day of. But again, I think it's something where we on the left have a moral urgency to basically get our shit in order and try to form political organizations and institutions and mobilize those that do exist to our ends, because there is the chance that the right might be able to do it at the same time that we're trying to do this. So
I think a kind of follow-up to that is there's the right and then there's the far right. So I think that the right, as in the Koch brothers right, extremely well organized, and you can see that happening at every state house, right? The far right is, I think, the sort of more visceral and scary part, or I think the part that takes up a lot of the media attention, as we're seeing right now, because obviously, like I said before, they often have guns. They do these very visual, kind of shocking things like storm capitals. Are they organized? That's a more difficult question to answer. But I'm wondering if you guys think, what do you think? How do you think the left should be responding to this? Do you think should we be showing up at the Capitol too?
Well, I mean, and I was gonna say, I think often in a moment like this or right after Charlottesville, there's going to be a renewed call to fight the right, and I think we should think more comprehensively about what that means. So to me, fighting the right and undermining the far right is not about just show up to a Proud Boys rally and yell at them. And I'll be honest, over the years, I've been at many rallies where I'm yelling at 30 middle-aged white guys who are kind of pathetic. And I leave those rallies, I don't necessarily feel like I've done much to fight the right in this country. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where the left should be confronting these groups, but I think when we talk about fight the right, we're we got to provide this alternative and really build a coalition that can be a governing majority in this country. And, there was a lot written. I think Harvey K has probably written a lot about, it was not impossible that in the 30s we wouldn't have fascism. I mean, that was totally on the cards. Could have happened. And I think it was the New Deal. And of course, the New Deal is limited, but that staved that off. And that's what kind of worried me about Biden's speech today. And I get the sense from what I know about the New Deal, maybe Harvey K can come on and yell at me if I'm wrong, but I think it's this sense they were in a crisis, and, it enlisted people in this project nationally. We're in this project together to, build a better life and a better alternative. And that's not what you're getting from Biden. I mean, he has the slogan, build back better. Okay. But then it's wear a mask. So that's the thing. I mean, we are, and I know the left every year and every day is a crisis for the left, but I really do think you can describe right now a crisis, and not just in an economic sense. And we're going to need something bigger to get us out of this than, this kind of just vague calls for unity, and decency. That's just not going to cut it. And I think the New Deal is, even as limited as it is, the best example we have of how we can get out of a crisis and truly avoid fascism.
Right. I think that I totally agree with what Paul's just said. I mean, the other big news today, of course, is that the Democrats have taken control of the Senate. And so what that means is that the Democrats control all three major arms of government. Additionally, it also means that Senator Bernard Sanders is going to be the chairman of the Budget Committee. So this is, there's a big opportunity right in front of us right now in two regards. One, of course, for the just obvious, the Democrats ran on, we need to get everyone a stimulus check. We need, Biden ran on an expansion of infrastructure and a number of other important kind of expansion of public goods. And, just to the extent that any one of us as individuals can hope that the future turns out right, I'm hoping that he delivers. That being said, there's a very good chance that he doesn't deliver for a number of reasons. part of it's just because of the way, you know, like the fact that anytime we've ever gotten anything good for working people, it really only ever happened when you had an organized working class, either labor movement or labor party or some kind of political formation that forced the hand of these elites to end up voting in the interests of working people, right? That it's really almost never happened from, you know, elites that said, yeah, you know, I'm going to do the right thing today. I think they deserve a little extra. Like, it has only ever come through the left commanding power. And so, again, I would love to be, you know, I would love for Biden to come through with what he ran on and what the Democrats ran on. I hope that many of these people are, in fact, sincere in what they advocated for. But my guess, if I had to place a bet right now, I'd say that we need to mobilize our side, and we need to be reaching out. We need to be pulling people to a left political project, because we're going to need more and more people on our side to get these things, to basically get concessions out of the political class, out of the economic ruling class. And so this is, and again, sweet Bernard, where he is, like, he's going to be giving us great opportunities in the year to come, I'm sure. And so it's going to be incumbent on us to take advantage of those opportunities.
I also want to make the point that I think that, program of expanded public goods could actually go a long way toward defanging and beating back the far right. And one example of that is in Idaho, in the 80s and 90s, the Aryan Nations, which is one of the leading white power groups at the time, had a compound in northern Idaho. And part of the way that they recruited people was to invite farmers who had been displaced by the farming crisis in the 80s to come live on the compound for free. So they basically took advantage, or they basically saw an opportunity with people who were, financially struggling with very real material hardship. And they were like, hey, come live here for free, and maybe check out this literature. And, I'm not like, that's not the only reason why their ranks grew. But obviously, if there had been an alternative for those farmers, rather than go live with the Nazis, like, that would have been a great thing. And I think would have taken a lot of wind out of the Aryan Nation sails. So.
Right. Well, the old labor slogan of, if you don't talk to them, they will.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's borne out time and time again.
Yeah.